Consider the demon, a being without shape and form as we understand it, a non-corporeal intelligence possessing the knowledge of the ages, for it predates time and the visible universe. A monstrous thing, twisted, depraved, and adorned in a seething shroud of malevolence beyond man's reckoning. Blackwater Media presents the Demonic Encounters Anthology. I've had this reoccurring nightmare since I was 7. It's about this thing that lives in the mirrors in my room, but it seems to follow me to other places because I had the same nightmare when I went away to college. It started simply enough. One night, I woke up and looked over into the mirror hanging on my door, and I could see this thing hunched over me, looking into the mirror and smiling. It had green, yellow eyes, dark, scraggly long hair, and entirely too many teeth. I guess at that point I woke up for real and turned on the TV in my bedroom, and it just went away. My mom took the mirror down the next day for me. Nothing happened again until my senior year of college. I had a room where I had my own bathroom, and my bed was right across from it. You could see into the mirror from my bed. There was also an old mirror hanging on the door leading to the hallway of my dorm building. From my bed, you could see a little table and chair set that I had set up. Well, first night I'm there, I wake up, and there the thing is again, lying in bed with me, but staring into the mirror and smiling at me. I freaked out and turned on my television to get some light in my room, and it was gone. I got out of bed, closed the door, and slept fairly well the rest of the night. Next night, the same thing happens. I wake up, and I look around, and my eyes settle on the mirror on the door leading out of my room. It's there again. It's smiling at me with a mouth full of too many sharp teeth. And then it stands up and walks out of the view of the mirror toward my bed. Toward me! I freaked the hell out. I turned to cover the mirror with printer paper and tape, and did not get much sleep at all. The next night, my friend invited me over to their place. I went over around 8 and fell asleep pretty early because I was exhausted. Well, you guessed it. I woke up and noticed a mirror next to the ladder leading up to my friend's bed, and the thing started climbing up to the bed beside me. I panicked and woke my friend up. I told her that I was leaving. From that point, I've made it a habit to cover mirrors with paper or scarves or whatever I can find. The weirdest thing is that sometimes when I talk about the thing, whatever I have covering the mirror will randomly fall off. I try to rationalize it as pure coincidence, but sometimes I'm not so sure. A few years ago, my brother would get a call on his cell phone around 2 or 3 a.m. every night. He would answer, and it was this hellish sounding noise, like static mixed with screams. He changed his cell number after a month of this, and it stopped. Then after a week or so, it began again, the same exact noise, exact same time. Finally, one day he decided to back dial the call. It was an old man that had no clue what he was talking about. Still, the calls persisted. If he didn't answer, it would call a few more times. No messages were left. He finally said, screw it. He ended his contract with his phone company, switched to a new one, and then got another new number. But you know what happened. The screaming static calls continued after a short delay. By this time, he was terrified every night, unsure why this was happening. He back dialed the number again and got a different person. Around this time, he lost his job and his phone. The call stopped, of course. His phone was disconnected now. So one day my mother asked me to listen to this weird message she got on our home phone. It was the same static screaming. We showed my brother and he was freaked out. He back dialed the number again and it said the number was disconnected this time. After that, none of us ever received a call like that again. But it makes you wonder. I'm being watched. You may pass me off as some madman, but I know I'm being watched by something obviously inhuman. I'm not going to work today. It'll just follow me there. I'm waiting to make some contact with it, to see it, to know I'm not going insane. Maybe I'm just suffering from schizophrenia and this is all in my head, but I'm not taking any chances. At times I hear a loud ringing in my ear. I just hope that I can fall asleep and all this will go away. I know it's real. It's watching me always. I see it in the corners of my eyes. I can hear it growling. I went to a psychiatrist today to tell him what I'd experienced over the last few days, and he thinks I'm suffering from schizophrenia. But he's wrong. They're all wrong. I barricaded myself into my home so I can be alone to study this inhuman entity as much as I please. Hopefully someone will find these letters and find this evil thing and take it away. I'm calling it The Observer. I'm going to write exactly what I see and hear. Hopefully it will just leave me alone. I caught a glimpse of it today, and it is definitely not human. It's about 6'3" and its posture was perfect. It wore a large cloak that looked black, but I didn't see it long enough. Its hands were large and its fingers more like knives. It didn't appear to have feet, just floating over the ground. I haven't seen its face yet, but I bet it's horrifying. It doesn't seem to move that fast, so maybe I could sneak up on it and attack it. I'm going to do some research and try to find anything I can about this. It forever growls, and I can't sleep at night in fear that it'll get me. My research was useless. Nothing is known about the Observer, at least not yet. My house is in complete darkness now. I've switched off all the lights, and I carry a flashlight around in better hope that it'll come out. I've seen glimpses, but still it keeps its face hidden. Maybe it's for the better. Maybe once I see its face, it goes into a rampage and kills me on sight. I'm taking my chances. I must see its face. I'm going to try to sleep tonight. I'm so tired. I managed to sleep last night to my relief, but what I woke up to was horrifying. While I was asleep, the Observer left a large cut all down my arm and wrote a message on the ceiling in my own blood. It said, "Forever watching." The writing was messy, but could clearly be understood. It's out to get me. This I now know. I can hear it everywhere, feel it breathing down my neck, although there's nothing there. It plays tricks with me. It wants to mess with my head before brutally murdering me. It's nightmare fuel, something from the depths of hell. I'm going to see its face no matter what. It may hold the key to what this thing truly is. I saw its face. I fell asleep while writing last night. When I woke up, it was in my hallway. It turned the light on and was staring right at me. It had a large cloak on that was ripped at the bottom. Like I said before, it has no feet and seems to hover. Its hands were claws, each one about 50 centimeters long, thick and sharp, almost like knives. Then I saw its face. It had a hood over its head, but its face was clearly visible. Its eyes were just empty sockets, black, and they never seemed to end. It had no nose, and then there's the mouth. It was in a circle shape, pitch black. It had no teeth, and there was a kind of smoke coming from it, also black. You couldn't see through it. Its skin color was a dark gray. It was horrible. My first instinct was to throw my lamp at it, so I did. It simply hit the observer and smashed. It didn't even stumble. I think it's immortal. With that, it fled the room with incredible speed. I fear for my life now. I've called the police. They said they're going to be about an hour. I hope they don't take that long. It could strike at any time. I'm locking myself in my closet. I just hope the thing can't read. Shortly after finding this diary, the police searched his house thoroughly. About 5 minutes into their search, they found his corpse in an empty closet. Large claw marks were all over his body, and there was a bite mark where his heart was. Many of his organs were ripped from his body, and his eyes had been gouged out. We now know that the observer is out there, feasting on innocent people. We advise you that if you hear loud growling or a high-pitched buzz or see a dark figure in the corner of your eye, that you contact your local authorities immediately. We have found no photographic evidence of its existence, but we will take its rough appearance from the description that Tom gave in his diary. This thing could be anywhere. In the year 2036, the Messiah came back down to earth. She performed miracles and cured the sick. There was no doubt as to her authenticity. She appeared to all nations at once. All believed. All worshipped her. Sometime later, after this period of our history known as the Age of Peace, she dropped a bombshell on us. She warned us that heaven was almost full. Nobody had gone to hell during this age. There was a fixed amount of spots left. Paradise would be closed to all who died after the gates closed. That is when the mass suicides began. Taking your own life, she had told us, was not a sin if you died a pious man. And the race was on. She looked on and was pleased. She returned to her home, to her throne of fire and flames, and greeted all with a nod of her wicked horns. Do not listen to the voice of the demon. I was told and told again. It was my anger, it was my pride, my weakness, my destruction, as the monster uttered his filth, slow dripping sludge and contempt beyond my reasoning. I was in one moment of time struck frozen, a portrait of final devastation. In the next moment, I was laid waste, broken, and left as less than a withering husk of a man. The universe swallowed me, as with a shroud of cold black pain, infinite burning, blades piercing my crumbling spirit. How I summoned any degree of strength, I did not know. Although shattered into hopeless fragments, I took to my feet and looked into the eyes of the damned. I had lost myself, but in solemn repose, I decided in an instant I would not lose this fight. You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. A woman in Texas bought a real haunted zombie voodoo doll on eBay in 2004. She thought it was just for display purposes. She took it out of the small coffin and displayed it. It was, she said later on, a real big mistake. The doll attacked her many times. She had cuts, bruises, and had been gashed open on her leg. After being attacked and knowing the doll was haunted, without a second thought, she left it on display. One evening, she was in her bedroom reading a book when she heard a tapping noise coming from the downstairs area. She was curious to find what was causing the noise. She opened the door, only to find the voodoo doll on the floor. This continued for several weeks. She would hear a tapping noise and find the doll on the ground. One night, she went to her porch and felt a stinging. She looked down and saw 3 claw marks on her ankle. Every night she was scratched, bit, and her leg was so gashed up that she had to go to the hospital. She put the doll back in its little coffin and shoved it into the basement, praying it would stay away from her. For weeks, she heard evil laughs and giggles, but she wouldn't dare open the basement door. The doll couldn't physically attack her, but it began to haunt her in her dreams. She tried to burn the doll, but it wouldn't work. She tried to cut it up, but the scissors broke as well as the knife she used. So she buried it in the cemetery, but it was too shallow and it appeared all dirty on her doorstep. She resold it on eBay, and the buyer said it disappeared from her home. The woman found the doll on her doorstep, and she had to send it back to the buyer. The buyer complained that it disappeared again. So when the woman found it on her doorstep again, she wrapped it up securely and then sent it back once again. After that, the buyer said the box was empty. Then the woman found the doll at her door again. 2 years later, the woman was finally able to get rid of the doll. She had a priest bless the doll, which made it calm down. Right now, the doll is blessed in its coffin and kept away in the basement. She was told to never remove it from that box again. The past few weeks, I've been awakened by something strange. No, strange isn't the right word. It's something monstrous and hideous. It's a dark and terrible thing that stands at the foot of my bed staring at me. Sometimes it has a menacing, grim expression on its face. Even worse, sometimes it stands there looking at me with a sinister, horrifying grin. Sometimes I can hear it making weird noises, hisses, mumbles, and an icy cold laugh. A laugh saturated with absolute evil. Now, let me tell you what this damn thing looks like. It's about 2 feet tall, with pointed ears and glowing red menacing eyes. Its mouth is kind of elongated with big sharp teeth all the way around it. And it seems vaguely reptilian. At least that's how it seems to me. It just stands there at the foot of my bed, or sometimes in the corner of the room, and stares at me. The other thing, too, is that it seems to appear just after 3 a.m. This disturbed me so much that I started doing some reading, some research into what this thing might be. And what I found out didn't make me feel any better. I did, however, discover a special prayer that should be recited to keep such things away. A few nights later, when I woke up and saw the entity standing there, I immediately started to recite the prayer. The thing instantly began seething and had an expression of the deepest, darkest contempt that you could imagine. I don't know if there are any words to describe it, but in just a few seconds it began to slowly fade away until it was gone. As it evaporated, it let out a terrible laugh and was gone. I see it every now and again, and when I do, the prayer chases it off. I'm looking to find a way to banish this thing permanently. Until I do, this battle will go on. A few years back, a mother and father decided they needed a break, so they wanted to head out for a night on the town. They decided to call their most trusted babysitter. When the babysitter arrived, their 2 children were already fast asleep in bed, so the babysitter decided to check in on the children and then do a little reading. Later that night, the babysitter, after reading several chapters, put her book down and thought about watching some TV. Now, she knew that the television in the den did not have cable, but the TV in the parents' bedroom did. So she went upstairs and gave them a quick call to ask if it was okay for her to watch television in their bedroom. Naturally, the parents granted her request, but before they hung up the phone, the babysitter made one additional request. She asked if she could cover up the angel statue because, for whatever reason, it made her nervous. The phone line went silent for a moment, and the father, who was talking to the babysitter at the time, said, "Take the children and get out of the house. For God's sakes, get out of there now." Shocked and confused, the babysitter cried out that she didn't understand. The father, in a panic rage, replied, "Go! Go now! We don't own a fucking angel statue." Later on, the police found both of the children and the babysitter slumped down in pools of their own blood within a few minutes of the phone call. No angel statue was ever found.
In Washington, ghost-like objects dart across the radar screen at the CAA Traffic Control Center at National Airport for several hours, traveling more than 100 miles an hour. Air Force jet fighters spend several hours chasing the objects plotted on the radar scope.
Something else is out there.
There's something else out there, okay.
Of all the banks and braes of bonny Scotland, none holds more fascination than the murky waters of Loch Ness.
Tell me, do you think there is life on other planets?
Well, I'm not quite sure, but I suppose there would be.
No, he seems definite. You seem
Definitely.
definite. How do you see this life and where?
Oh, I've seen a flying saucer.
Blackwater Media presents Dark Fall. Real-life encounters with the paranormal and the unexplained. This incident, which I'd like to share with you, happened when I was about 15. I hope that after you hear and understand what happened to me, that you never, ever consider using a Ouija board. And if you have used one, don't ever use it again. At the time, several strange things were happening, which I believe had to do with a seance my friend and I put on. We were using a homemade Ouija board made from a piece of scrap plywood, those big stinky magic markers, and a glass from the kitchen for a planchette. Nothing much exciting happened during the seance, and to be honest, I thought my friend was pushing the glass and never thought much of it. That is, until I began waking up at 3:15 a.m. every morning with a genuine sensation of total terror. I would lie awake in my bed with the covers over my head as I had a strange sensation of being watched and was afraid of what was in the room with me. I would lie there until the sun came up. I was always terrified of looking in a certain direction, and upon inspection, I found the glass which had been used in the damn seance. This took me by surprise as the glass had been disposed of, so I was certain that the glass was the reason for my sleepless nights. I got rid of the glass again. However, I kept experiencing the same feelings, and once again, upon inspection, came across the same glass that I'd already thrown in the garbage twice. What the fuck was going on with this damn glass? This time I was determined to get rid of it, so I took it outside and smashed it on the ground. I continued waking at 3:15 a.m. to the minute every morning without fail, and I started seeing strange, dark shadows. The shadows started as perfect black balls which would circle my room, then seemed to disappear through my window. Now, believe it or not, I put this off to paranoia and lack of sleep and simply tried to ignore it and went back to sleep, still with my head under the covers, of course. Then other people started noticing the shadow too, and I mean during the daytime. They would tell me towards the end of the house where my room was seemed a bit creepy. Gradually, the shadows seemed to get bigger, but I continued to ignore them. Until one night, the family dog woke me up again, 3:15 a.m. He was sitting next to my bed and he was making a crying sound. I figured the dog needed to go out, so I got up and let him outside. As soon as I was back in bed, the dog was at my window, squeaking and carrying on, so I got back up and let him back inside. The dog followed me to my room and once again sat by my bed whimpering. Then I took him back outside, and even though he sat at my window still crying, I made him stay out there for a bit because I didn't want him coming back in and waking me up. Now, I eventually gave in and let the dog back inside. The bathroom light was on, letting light flood the hallway as I walked back to my room, where the dog started growling. I moved closer to the bathroom door so the dog could see it was me, as I was worried he was growling at my shadow. I called him up to me and he was still growling, and I said, "Hey, it's only me. Come here. What's the matter?" The dog walked slowly towards me, still growling, and sat next to my leg, growling at something that he perceived to be behind me. In that moment, my thoughts turned to, "Oh shit, there's somebody in the house." And I turned around and started running down the hallway. What I saw has never left my mind, and something no one has ever believed when I've told them. I saw what seemed to be like a huge bird. It had huge outstretched wings that would have touched the roof and almost to the floor. Its body ended where the wings did, and neither seemed to touch the floor. As it followed me down the hallway, the wings stayed outstretched and it seemed to glide as it moved. I did notice a small head between the wings, but no features that I can recall, and the head seemed hooded rather than round and connected to the body without a neck. To me, the creature seemed more shadow-like than of flesh. I tried to momentarily bullshit myself and attribute it to my own shadow, but it wasn't. It was real. I remember mostly the wings and the enormity of them as they towered over me and how it moved as it followed after me until it slipped into another room. I'm not sure what happened to it after that, but my sister, who was older and didn't believe in anything paranormal, had some scary experiences involving a black shadow that would terrorize her at night. Let me bottom line this for you. There are evil, malicious spirits that will absolutely exploit human arrogance and stupidity. Never try to conjure spirits. It won't go well for you. And I don't give a shit what anybody tells you about surrounding yourself with white light, burning sage, salt on the floor, whatever. That's all paranormal TV show, psychic fair bullshit. Demons operate on a whole nother level. Think about that before you sit down and try to use a Ouija board.
In Washington, ghost-like objects dart across the radar screen at the CAA Traffic Control Center at National Airport for several hours, traveling more than 100 miles an hour. Air Force jet fighters spend several hours chasing the objects plotted on the radar scope.
Something else is out there.
There's something else out there, okay.
Of all the banks and braes of bonny Scotland, none holds more fascination than the murky waters of Loch Ness.
Tell me, do you think there is life on other planets?
Well, I'm not quite sure, but I suppose there would be.
No, he seems definite. You seem
Definitely.
definite. How do you see this life and where?
Oh, I've seen a flying saucer.
Blackwater Media presents Dark Fall. Real-life encounters with the paranormal and the unexplained. I went to Europe by myself when I was 19. I had no idea what I was doing, but I wanted to go before life happened, like so many people told me when I asked them why they never traveled. I was only going to travel for a few weeks because I had very little money, but I ended up finding jobs here and there and was able to stay for almost a year. I went to Greece at one point and met a young woman who was my age, and we hit it off. She lived in Thessaloniki, but her family was from a small village near the border with Bulgaria. She hadn't gone to visit her grandmother in a while and thought it would be fun to go if I went with her. I jumped at the idea, and I thought it'd be cool to go to her village. It's very small. Only a few homes had running water or electricity, and only one person had a phone. Now, the people in this town were hardly friendly. They stared at me as if I was guilty of something. I thought it was a beautiful village, and I felt like I'd stepped back into the past. We were to sleep in her grandmother's old house, no electricity, one faucet, and an outhouse. Strangely, the old woman would gather seeds and dry them on the floor, so all the floors were covered in crunchy seeds, so every step was just the sound of crunching. But she lived there alone, so it didn't really matter. Our bedroom was upstairs. It had 2 twin beds and 2 windows, but the windows were boarded up completely. Most of the house was boarded up like that too. I thought it was strange. That night it was so dark we had to keep a candle lit. We went to bed early, or what was early for us, closed the door as we were told because of stray cats and snakes, and got in our beds, but ended up talking for a long time. I thought the village and the people were so interesting, and she was excited to talk about it with me. Finally, we started to drift off. She blew out the candle, and within a couple of minutes, we heard what sounded like crunching footsteps coming up the stairs. I froze, and I assumed she did too. I thought it was her grandmother checking up on us. The footsteps continued up to the door and stopped for a second or two just outside the door, and then continued into the room. Crunching footsteps until I could tell whatever it was standing in the middle of our room, as if it had just walked through the door. I said, "Did you hear that? Are you awake?" and she said yes and yelled out for her grandmother and said some things I didn't understand. She fumbled to light the candle again, and when it was all lit, we could see that no one was in the room except for us, and the door was still closed. We could hear her grandmother coming up the stairs quickly. She opened the door and asked what was going on. My friend told her, but she didn't believe us and looked at me like it was my fault. The old lady told us to stop being silly and go to sleep. The next day when we woke up, we went for a walk to look at the ruins just outside of the city. When we got there, a lot of things happened almost at once. First, we noticed a stillness. Then many animals started making loud noises, kind of screeching in their own ways. The sky got dark, and then one big, and I mean one goddamn big strong wind came through. Not in a straight line, it kind of swirled through in one big gust. And it was really loud too. Then it just passed, and things went back to normal, almost like nothing ever happened. When we got back to the village, it was a mess, like it was hit by a small tornado. Even at the house of my friend's grandmother, all of the seeds were blown off the floors. As we walked back into the village, people stared at me like it was my fault and were saying things to each other that I felt was about me. I told my friend what I was feeling about how everyone was staring and talking, and she said, "They are talking about you." She told me that they were saying that I brought something bad or evil to the village, and they didn't want me to stay. They said they'd never experienced a strange wind like that before. We did leave the next day, but I didn't believe I'd taken anything bad there. It took me years to understand, but later I realized that there might have been something attached to me, something the village didn't welcome. Hey everybody, this is Dr. William Lester, and I want to tell you about a new membership opportunity from Blackwater Media. Now yes, you can sign up for the regular Swamp Hunter Society membership at $4.99 a month and have access to the premium content. But you also have the option of getting the Blackwater Media VIP full year membership. That's right, with a one-time payment of just $49.99, you can have the same access to the same premium content, early releases, at a savings of almost $10 off of a regular membership. So if you enjoy the finest in paranormal and cryptid horror, head on over to blackwatermedia.net and get your Blackwater Media VIP full year membership. Dr. Lester, I saw your recent post about the Hat Man. I had an encounter with this being in the late 80s when I was driving tractor trailer. I stopped to get some sleep on the steering wheel of the cab, which, keep in mind, is about 12 feet off the ground. I felt like someone was looking at me, so I lifted my head up off the steering wheel and looked out the driver's side window, and he was staring at me. He couldn't have climbed up the side of my truck. He was wearing an old-fashioned tuxedo and a top hat. He was pure white, except his eyes were pure black. In 2016, I was visiting some relatives in Maryland. Every so often I'd stop by and just relax with them. Where they live was somewhat suburban with forest land towards the back of their property. It was a fairly large wooded area, but I never really paid much attention to it. I said all that to give a picture of my surroundings on this particular night. It had to be between 11:30 and midnight. Anyway, we were talking when a strange feeling came over me, as though something bad was about to happen. I got up off the porch and began to scan the street. My cousins all the while talking, when I saw a creature that resembled a deer walk out onto the street. It was four-legged with way more muscle mass than any buck I ever seen. Its head was huge and fit its massive body. Height-wise, I'd say it was about 6.5 feet, maybe more. Its antlers were the strangest part to me, though. I mean, they were wide, way more so than I thought they should be. But they didn't really stick up like a regular deer. They curved and bent into 3 intricately grown stacks on top of each other. It was weird. It gave me the impression that it was some ancient beast that roamed the woods for hundreds of years. It was like this thing shouldn't even have existed. It didn't even have that timid, skittish walk like you see from most deer. It walked as though it was royalty and dared anyone to challenge it. It stopped in the middle of the street and just stared at me. So we both stood looking at each other for about 20 seconds or so. And it was as if it wanted me to know that it was there. Then, just as calm as it walked out, it turned and walked back to the direction it came. Now, of course, my cousins were too busy running their mouths to get off the porch and see it. So I'm the only one that got a good look at it. And when I tried to tell one of them, their drunk asses just said it was an old buck. Now, I'm by no means an outdoors man, but I've seen older bucks with gray hairs and huge antlers, and that thing was nothing like them. When I told an old coworker of mine from South America who's had encounters with the paranormal, she told me that the devil had decided to show himself to me that night. So that's my whole story from that night. I shared it because, in all honesty, I wish I knew what the hell that thing was. And hopefully, it wasn't the devil. But the way that year was for me, it might well have been.
In Washington, ghost-like objects dart across the radar screen at the CAA Traffic Control Center at National Airport for several hours, traveling more than 100 miles an hour. Air Force jet fighters spend several hours chasing the objects plotted on the radar scope.
Something else is out there.
There's something else out there, okay.
Of all the banks and braes of bonnie Scotland, none holds more fascination than the murky waters of Loch Ness.
Tell me, do you think there is life on other planets?
Well, I'm not quite sure, but I suppose there would be.
No, he seems definite. You seem
Definitely.
definite about it. How do you see this life and where?
Oh, I've seen a flying saucer.
Blackwater Media presents Dark Fall. Real-life encounters with the paranormal and the unexplained. I'd like to share a story with you about something that happened to me, in which I came to learn that there is true evil in this world. And it's a dark, malevolent spiritual force that at times seems almost beyond comprehension. When I was about 16 going on 17, my parents rented a small house. This place was old when I lived there. The house was built in the 1890s and had everything you needed to live there. Anyway, about a month after we moved in, I noticed things being misplaced, which initially was not that big a deal. I didn't really think much of it, except for maybe thinking that I put an item in a spot, when really I didn't. It wasn't until much later that anything really happened. It was like a slow progression and buildup of what was to follow. At times, It smelled like we had a bad sewage backup somewhere under the house. Naturally, my father checked, and our plumbing was fine. But the smell continued from time to time, so we just learned to live with it. I started having terrible nightmares, and eventually, I couldn't even sleep. I started failing in school because of this shit. I mean, my grades totally bottomed out. The only time I actually got a decent night's rest was when I'd stay at a friend's house on the weekend. One night I was awake and went into the living room to keep from falling asleep, and I had a sharp burning pain shoot straight down my back. I remembered screaming in agony because the pain and burning were so intense. I had no other choice but to scream. My mom and dad ran from their bedroom into the living room, and at this point, I was on the floor still screaming. But I didn't voluntarily get down on the floor. I was being forced down. My parents' eyes were big, and my dad, who is a very strong and tall man, went to pick me up, and he was thrown onto the couch as if he were little more than a rag doll. My mother must have been in shock, because she just stood there with a look of sheer terror on her face. I continued screaming until whatever had forced me down let off. My dad got up and picked me up. I was crying and screaming, and my father couldn't understand me. Once I found that I was able to talk, I said I felt a sharp and burning pain and it hurts really bad. He stood me up and lifted the back of my shirt. All I could hear was my mom saying, oh my God," over and over. I turned around and my mother said I had scratches, and a really big scratch all the way down my spine. I noticed that my arms and stomach were also savagely scratched. I started crying again, and when I yelled out for the thing to leave me alone, we heard the creepiest growl come from somewhere in the living room, like a big dog was hiding. Mom and Dad figured it'd be a good idea to leave now and get our things in the morning. So we took off that night and stayed in a hotel. The next day I remembered us getting all of our things, and the owner of the house stopped by and asked why we were leaving. And my dad explained, and the owner's eyes got huge. He couldn't talk for a second, but when he could, he told us the house was a church at some point. But it was a church for satanic worship, and a few people had died there from some weird sacrifice. The owner wasn't upset that we were leaving. He understood completely. To this day, when I tell people this story, they get creeped out, and other people ask why I wasn't possessed, since it was clearly a demonic haunting. I usually just tell them that I got away before it could do anything else. I've never had anything like this happen again. I appreciate everyone listening and allowing me the opportunity to tell my story. I hope in some way it can maybe help other people that experience demonic hauntings, and perhaps find some peace and comfort in the knowledge that even in the face of pure evil, that we're never, ever truly alone.
Here's to good friends. Tonight is kind of special. The beer will pour. Must say something more somehow. So tonight, let it be low and brown. Let it be low and brown. It's been so long. Hey, I'm glad to see you. Raise your glass. Here's to health and happiness. So tonight, let it be all the best.
When you're with good friends having good times, don't just have a beer, have a low and brown. Because good friends and good times deserve the taste of a great beer. And there's really only one, low and brown.
Tonight, let it be low and brown.
My name is Derek, and I'm 17 years old. I live in Middleton, Idaho. My entire life, I never believed in ghosts, or heaven, or hell, or anything else paranormal for that matter, until just recently. So let me set this up for you. Now, the whole story of my life and the things I've gone through are too long to put down, so I'll just share the basics. Because, frankly, I'm fucking afraid for my life and my family's life. And I need some help. So a couple of my friends had talked me into playing with a Ouija board in my house about a year ago. And I agreed because I thought it was all stupid and that nothing would come of it. But I was way wrong. I left the house to live with my father for a while, and the house was left vacant. Eventually I moved back in with my mom, and we decided to go back to our old house that I had played the Ouija board in. Ever since then, I've had some terrible experiences with something that I believe is an unclean spirit. A demon. I mean, shit, I've experienced things like my bed moving, scratching on the walls, waking up with a heaviness on my chest and not being able to move or speak, and even seeing a very tall, cloaked figure that physically attacked me. I'm scared to even go to sleep at night because it's appeared in front of me and has now started leaving what I assume are satanic symbols on the ceiling and floor where I sleep. It's destroyed religious objects in my house. I've taken photos of all these symbols and would like to get some kind of, I don't know, interpretation as to what they might mean. And I don't know what to do because I've never experienced anything like this before. I live with 5 people, and they've all witnessed these events, although no one has been attacked except for me. It keeps getting worse. It's thrown objects across the room. And I feel like a crazy person. I just want it to fucking stop. I need help like I've never needed help in my life. Right now, my everyday existence is nothing more than a state of terror. One last thing. Don't ever mess with one of these Ouija boards. It's the most dangerous game in the world that you could play. And the ultimate prize is your soul.
Men, Frank Crummett is here with me to say a word about Roy Tan cigars. Frank Crummett.
I'm really a fan for Roy Tan, and the reason is Roy Tan has more long filler Havana tobacco, and yet it's a 5-cent cigar. Man to man, smoke Roy Tan.
Late one night, my insomnia got the better of me, and after hours of tossing and turning, I gave up and went downstairs to make coffee. My dog decided she would take this rare opportunity to go for a late night walk, and I thought, since it was a cool evening, maybe it would do us both good. I decided to take our usual route since it was very dark and we both knew the neighborhood well. Things were not right almost from the start. As soon as we hit the next block, Bella, my dog, seemed very unsettled. Now, I just wrote it up to the dark and time of our walk, although we have walked many times at this hour over the years for some reason or other. She kept looking behind us and rushing along. Not at all her usual MO. Usually she just strolls slowly and carefully because of her advanced age. Now, I wasn't concerned at first because for years I've carried a .45 sidearm and the entire neighborhood knew it. Now, we got to our first right at the stop sign, and I thought while she did her thing on the fire hydrant, I'd light a cigarette. The street light went dim and then out. And I thought, okay, shit, that was weird. But we kept walking. Every street light we walked under dimmed and went out, or almost. I started feeling the hair on the back of my neck stand up and hearing noises on the opposite side of the street, too. Maybe cats or skunks. That's what I told myself. Halfway home, I looked at my phone and it was 3 a.m. Great. I put my phone back in my pocket and rubbed my St. Benedict medal for comfort. I was really working myself up. Now that's when the shit happened. Bella spun, ran in front of me, and the hackles and ears fully up started growling like I have never heard her do. She was baring her teeth and acting very aggressive at essentially nothing, at least that I could see. She then let loose of her bladder and spun and took off as fast as a 15-year-old dog can. Now I was really freaked the hell out. I dropped the leash and started after her. Now that's when every dog in the goddamn neighborhood started howling. Bella was not barking or even in sight, but dogs were baying and howling. And while I was chasing after her, maybe it was just my imagination or something, I don't know. But for whatever reason, I became very aware of the blessed medal I had around my neck. Now check it out. I was walking in the direction that Bella went, and I was saying to myself that at her age, how far could she go? Now, feeling like I was being watched, I found her a block and a half away in a yard no dog goes in because the owners treat their lawn with that anti-canine treatment shit. And she was sitting in front of a statue of Mary. I said to myself, this walk is over. I called my wife to come and get us, and when dialing the phone, did not miss the fact that although 10 minutes had elapsed, my phone still read 3 a.m. Now, of course, my wife showed up very pissed off until I got in the car with Bella, who was shaking so much you would have thought it to be 40 degrees instead of 65. And I was white as a sheet. She told me on the ride over, she saw a black shape dart behind a tree, only it wasn't there when she drove by. And she said to me, it's a good thing you brought your gun. But I, on the other hand, knew it was a different kind of protection and of a different nature that had saved us. After that, my wife asked me why I got a St. Michael medal for Bella's collar. I said, it can't hurt. I know that night we were stalked by real evil, and I'd rather the whys and what remain a mystery. But what I do know for damn sure, I don't ever want to go through something like that again. I've always felt the presence of spirits. They often come to me as a dreamlike vision while I'm just about to drift off to sleep. In my youth, I got flashes of scary, gory, horrifying imagery. Then I would feel a presence. I learned to communicate with mental imagery and found if I allowed the spirits to pass through me, they could finally rest. It's been many years since I've tried to communicate. In the last 4 or so years, I've had a new experience with visions of a flash of a dead, decapitated, bloody body in a car wreck. I started feeling a very heavy negative energy around me at home, like I'm being watched. It's strongest just before bed. This entity isn't interested in communicating or trying to get my attention to pass on. It feels content to stay and lurk around me in my bedroom. One night a vision came to me unlike any other. a goat head with horns, and a woman's chest with goat legs. After some research, I discovered that this was Baphomet. This was an image I'd seen before, but it scared me so damn much, I put it out of my mind. Eventually, I performed a sage rubbing, read the 23rd Psalm aloud. I lit a white candle, fanned the smoke, and made ash crosses above the doors. I tried imagery of me cutting the head off this beast with a sword. Since then, I've gotten a new vision. A 3-horned, bull-headed man's upper body and lower legs like a hooved animal. Visions of a cliff with gray, naked bodies holding onto each other, pulling each other down. I feel worried, scared, nervous. This entity won't leave, and I'm horrified. I don't know where to turn. If there's anyone out there with any answers or a solution, I'm begging you to reach out. With a few notable exceptions, this world isn't very kind to the writer. It's an existence of nagging solitude and endless hours stretched out ahead of that which is yet to appear on paper. And the prevailing state of mind is one of normalized rejection and the regularity of self-doubt. Our story this time around illustrates the unfortunate truth that for the writer, the supernatural world can be even more diabolically unkind. Therefore, please accept this little interlude of literary deviltry called Something Strange in the Attic, which should come as no surprise in a place such as the Nightfall radio show. Looking back on everything after a number of years, I don't think that I can properly convey to you the depth of the regret I feel for being dismissive and cavalier, for ignoring the warning signs. You see, there's something strange in the attic. My attic, I mean. And I swear to you that it's nothing short of a nightmare made real. I didn't question why the house was so cheap. I mean, it wasn't a fixer-upper or anything. The wiring and the plumbing were both in good shape. The foundation was solid, and according to the inspector, the roof was in good shape. A couple of fresh coats of paint here and there, and as far as I was concerned, I was good to go. You see, despite a very popular misconception, making a living as a writer is a hell of a struggle. I'd put out 3 books in 4 years, and no less than 10 short stories for various anthologies. But I was driving a car that needed at least 2 of its tires replaced. The brakes were shot too, and believe me when I tell you, there's little charm and glamour in slugging cheap gin and soda at 2 in the morning while slugging away on a laptop keyboard. I often worked until well after sunrise. It was during these working hours, usually just after 3 a.m., that I first took notice of strange sounds. You know how it can be when it's late and the house is quiet? You can sometimes hear things that you would normally never notice during the bustle and activity of daylight hours. Initially, I chalked this all up to the normal clicks and creaks, and even to my own imagination and fatigue. But night after night the sounds returned, usually around the same time, just after 3. I wasn't really sure of the source, but it seemed to me that it was coming from inside the walls. I remember thinking to myself, great, just fucking great, I've got rats. But it wasn't rats. The exterminator that I called out, and really couldn't afford, found no trace of the troublesome rodents. After that, the noises increased. It had graduated to taps and scratching, almost as if something with claws was attempting to maneuver itself through the innards of the house. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out just what the hell was going on. I was becoming increasingly distracted from my work, and this eventually manifested into a level of stress, which was the last goddamn thing I needed. A few days later, I started picking up on a terrible odor. It seemed to be concentrated in the hallway. Now, by terrible, imagine the stench of an open sewer in a landfill and rotting meat, and then triple that. It became nearly impossible when the odor hit to keep anything in my stomach. It became more and more difficult to sleep, and nearly impossible to get any work done. Finally, whatever it was that was haunting me, and by the way, I had no problem in acknowledging that it was a haunting, but whatever it was seemed to only make noises directly overhead. Now let me get something straight here and now. I'm not some kind of badass that has no fear of the supernatural or the paranormal or whatever you want to call it. I was scared shitless, but I was also angry at whatever had committed this brazen violation of my life and in my space. I went down the hallway, reached up, grabbed the cord, and pulled down the ladder. Now, as I moved up the rungs, I could hear other sounds, including the sound of air moving around, almost like you would expect the sound of the wind to be outside on a blustery day. I could hear a swirling sound, and small pieces of debris were circling in the air around me. Then, on the far side of the room, I could see a figure, partially obscured in the darkness, and yet still somehow emanating a faint yellow light around itself. And I could hear the growing sound of maniacal laughter moving across the room. I was completely and totally horrified by that point. And then I got a better look at it. It was roughly human-shaped and appeared to be in a squatted or crouched position, almost like a frog or a toad, but with long, bony, sharp-clawed fingers. Its flesh, or what I took to be flesh, was a gruesome mottled amalgamation of pink, gray, and dark green. Its eyes were just empty black pits of nothing, but within them, I could sense an evil older than perhaps even time itself. That was it. I was finished. Fuck it. I literally slid down the ladder, bumping my knee halfway down. As I lifted the door to close it, I could still hear the thing up there taunting me with its fiendish cackle. I got online, found and reserved a U-Haul truck, packed my shit up, picked the truck up when they opened, loaded it, and got the hell out of there. Once I got on the road, I called the realtor, broke the lease, and when he tried to get stupid, I told him he could kiss my ass and sue me. That was 3 months ago. I'm renting a little place in town now, a second-floor flat. I sold a couple of stories last week to a publisher out of Chicago, so I can probably make rent this month and maybe even a stake this weekend. As for the new place, no weird noises, no terrible odors, and no raging demons. And you know why? No goddamn attic. There was no pearly gate. The only reason I knew I was in a cave was because I had just passed the entrance. The rock wall rose behind me with no ceiling in sight. I knew this was it. This was what religion talked about, what man feared. I just entered the gate to hell. I felt the presence of the cave as if it was a living, breathing creature. The stench of rotted flesh overwhelmed me. Then there was a voice. It came from inside and all around. Welcome. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my composure. "You know," the thing answered. I did know. "You're the devil," I stuttered quickly, losing my composure. "Why me? I've lived as good as I could." The silence took over the space as my words died out. It seemed like an hour went by before the response came. "What did you expect?" The voice was penetrating but patient. "I don't know. I never believed any of this." "Is that why I'm here?" "They say the greatest trick you ever pulled was convincing the world you don't exist." "No," the voice answered back. "The greatest trick I ever pulled was convincing the world that there is an alternative." In a shivering voice, I asked, "Then there's no God?" Then came the response. The cave trembled with the words.